Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here. We're going to get started with our program. This is the highest praise, Cannabis and Faith. This is Elevate Northeast's first community conversation of the new year. Welcome. It's March, feeling spring in the air a little bit. I'm Beth Waterfall. I'm the executive director and one of the co-founders of Elevate Northeast. And so on behalf of our whole team, thank you so much for being here and joining us tonight. It's going to get cold, bundle up, but we're going to hopefully have a conversation that warms your souls. Again, this is the highest praise, Cannabis and Faith. Just a quick overview of how our tonight's program is going to go. Obviously, welcome. Thank you for being here. Just a couple of announcements from Elevate Northeast, and we'll introduce our speakers, have a discussion, and then take questions from the audience. And so just one of our first announcements, I think most of you, if you've been here, if you're familiar with Elevate Northeast, you've heard it before. We launched an educational scholarship fund last year, primarily funding students to go to Holyoke Community College's Cannabis Education Center, where there are different programs that help them prepare for a career in cannabis. So there's a Cannabis Core program, and then 4 career track programs for folks that are interested in more in-depth studies into cultivation, working in a kitchen, working with patients. And then, so we're accepting donations. We're also accepting applications for students that want to apply to get a scholarship and go into one of these programs. That we have a few scheduled throughout the spring. So if you have any interest in that, we're taking, again, the donations and applications. So visit our website, elevatene.org, for more information. And for those who are unfamiliar with Elevate Northeast, we are a woman-founded 501c3 out of Massachusetts. And for the 3rd year in a row, we've been nominated in the New England Cannabis Community Awards. This is a special event that's at the New England Cannabis Convention next month, March 18th through 20th. On Friday night, there's a little celebration that acknowledges folks in the community. We've been nominated in 3 categories. I was nominated as well. You can vote through tomorrow at mecan.com, mecanaCommunityAwards.com. So thank you for your vote. This is absolutely a labor of love for us, and we appreciate all the support we've gotten over the past few years to pull all this stuff together. And we hope we do see you at NECAN. And if you do want to go, you can sign up at necan.com and use Elevate25 to get 25% off your tickets. There's workshop tickets, expo tickets, education tickets. So 25% off is a pretty good deal. And I hope to see you there. We'll be at booth 1205 in the expo hall. And before we get started with our program, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and send our hearts out to the people of the Ukraine and their loved ones. Certainly, sending all the love to those folks. But let's get started for the highest praise, Cannabis and Faith. First, I want to thank our sponsor, MCR Labs. They've been a longtime supporter of Elevate Northeast and our community conversation series. If you're not familiar with MCR Labs, they're a Massachusetts-based cannabis testing laboratory. So businesses and individuals can test their cannabis flower, different concentrates, all sorts of stuff, just to ensure safety. But they've been a wonderful sponsor and supporter of Elevate. So thank you again to MCR Labs. And now I'm going to hand things off to our moderators. We have Tashonda Vincent-Lee, who's our Director of Community Outreach, and Jessica Hamilton. So Tashonda, take it away.
Welcome again, everyone. We're so happy to have you back with us for another installment of our community conversation series. As Beth shared initially, if you were able to catch it, this particular event has been about after regrouping with our executive team. We realized it's actually been 3 years. So this was at the beginning and conception of Elevate that we decided to do this event. So again, in the spirit of Elevate, we love to have those conversations that individuals may not necessarily be readily having at home, but we understand that they're imperative to us individually, our community collectively, as well as also just the health that we all live in and hope to achieve. So happy to be here. I'll share a joke with everyone. It was so funny. So this is like the first event that I actually was ecstatic to share with my grandmother, because I knew that she would be really happy about this particular topic. So I was like, hey, Grandma, I'm finally doing something that I think you'll find interesting. And I think that your friends will, find intriguing as well. And let her know that we were actually going to talk about cannabis and faith. So I encourage everyone to please share tonight's recording with your family or friends as well. We want to let everyone know just from the onset of this event that this conversation is not to sway anyone in any particular direction. This is just bringing together a collective group of individuals who's willing to have the tough conversation, share their particular perspectives and what their understanding of things are, sort of why we are where we are, and then also some insight on where we can go. So I'm really, really happy to have everyone here. Before I introduce Jessica, my esteemed co-moderator this evening, we want to introduce our panelists. So we want everyone to introduce themselves. Please share with the community a little bit about who you are. Also, please feel free to share a little bit about your religious and or spiritual background, just so that everyone can get a better sense of who you are and sort of the perspective that you'll be sharing with us this evening. So Nicole, I'm actually going to start with you. Oh, you're still on mute there.
I apologize to Shonda, I was muted, my apology. So hello everyone, my name is Nicole. A lot of people call me Nikki, so feel comfortable in the future. You can always call me that. It's been my lifelong name. I consider myself a natural spiritualist person. I believe in natural livity. I believe that you can live a life without medicine from pharmaceutical companies. And my goal in life is to make sure that everyone knows what options they have holistically in order to live a better life where they're not subjected to becoming dependent on medicinal drugs. We have a lot of natural drugs, hence our conversation this evening. And different, I shouldn't say drugs, excuse me, a lot of natural medicine as far as, you know, the flower cannabis and roots and other things that we can use to make ourselves better. So that is what my goal is for all of you, is to know that with your mind, body, and spirit, anything is possible. And you just have to know how to navigate through life in a positive way and make sure that you're always making sure your mind is in the right place. There's so many ways to do that. And that is what I do on a daily basis for people through meditation, through massage, Reiki, and different other natural healings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Yes, thank you.
So, of course. So next we have Jeremy.
Thanks to Shonda, and it was lovely to hear you, Nikki.
Thank you.
So my name is Jeremy Michael Schultz. You can call me Jer, you're welcome to. So my family and friends call me. And I'm a theologian and a spiritual counselor with hospice. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's where I am now. But I ended up through a lot of challenging events, finding my way to seminary. And I ended up going to Hartford Seminary, which was now Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, and then Boston University School of Theology. And I graduated with my master's in divinity with a focus in chaplaincy and a master's in sacred theology. And kind of a bit about me. I don't come from a particular tradition of faith. My family were varying flavors of Christianity, and I just never really was, it never swayed me as much as it had my family, in part because my dad died when I was 6, and the Catholic priest insisted that we see his body, my brother and I, and that just really shook me for sure, and my brother, I know. During my life as an adolescent growing up, I experienced a lot of trauma. My dad had died. I lost a lot of family members following that. And when I was 17, I was sexually assaulted by someone in my high school. At the time, my stepdad was a state cop, and he, was very anti-cannabis and very anti-queer. I'm queer, by the way. So it was a hard time, and I ended up turning to alcohol as my source for coping. And that was like for the last 10 years, that was how I made it through life. My brother in 2018 died of alcohol-related heart failure, and that was a big wake-up call. I ended up going following it. His death happened as I was leaving Hartford and going to Boston. And when I got to Boston, cannabis was legal, and it is legal. And it was more in vogue almost than alcohol for a lot of my friends. So I used cannabis personally to support my own care of my addiction. And cannabis remains something that I am passionate about in my own life. But when I got back to Albuquerque after graduating, I started working in hospice. I work at Hospice of New Mexico, and I'm a spiritual counselor, like I said, or chaplain. And one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of our hospice patients used cannabis for the treatment of their suffering and pain, varying pains. And that started to kind of awaken me to the reality of cannabis, not just in our centers of like liberal spaces like Boston or Massachusetts or California, but that like New Mexico is a pretty strange place, and to have cannabis really be both a spiritual and a physical cure or treatment for pain in healthcare has been really powerful. So that's a little about me, and I'm excited to meet the rest of our panelists.
Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like you shared your story with us, and I know you shared some with me before, but again, I'm really sorry for your loss. But my team and I was just sharing of how proud we are of just hearing your story and how far you've come, because it takes a lot of bravery to be where you are and to do the things that you've done. So congratulations, and please keep fighting the good fight. We need you here. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. So next we have Archange. Would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about you? And
absolutely. Number one, I just want to thank you all for having me on, and I want to just thank Elevate and the highest praise. I think this is an awesome program. A little about me. Again, my name is Archange Antoine. If you say it in Creole, Archange Antoine. I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. I am the son of immigrant parents who really came from a very tough life and made it to America as political refugees after the Duvalier era. And for me, I have 10 years as a community organizer, working on every issue from infrastructure to immigration, racial justice, criminal justice reform, education, you name it. Mainly worked in New Jersey, but did some work out in Ohio and Pennsylvania as well. I was elected official. I was elected on the Roselle School Board for about 9 years and fought the good fight for my community. And currently, I'm a minister at St. Matthew's Baptist Church, and I'm in my last semester at Princeton Theological Seminary in New Jersey. And for me, I'm a person who is deeply connected to my faith. I'm a Christian. However, the scope of my God does not relegate to just me being a Christian. I've learned to see the God in all people. And for me, at the heart of my work is about making sure that the church no longer neglects God's people because of the different stereotypes and taboo and sort of narratives that exist in the world that we've kind of adopted as the church. And more importantly, for me, it's just important that the church is in the liberating business, right? That we have to start at the liberation model where our job is not to condemn, but to support, to uplift, to bring God's people closer and not push them away. And for us to be a beacon of the light and throughout wherever we step. And so for me, it's just very important about not just doing the work in the church, but in the community and using our voices and our bodies outside in the world, especially against oppressive forces and systems that continue to deprive God's people of their humanity. And so for me, again, that is the core of what I believe in and what I'm also willing to die for. So again, I just want to thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you, Arcane. First of all, I should have started off with Sabase. So I apologize. Thank you for sharing I'm excited. Like every time I hear you all share your background and what brought us all to this place, this intersection, I'm just like, I can't wait to get into the meat and potatoes of tonight's panel, but I'm excited. Thank you so much for being here. And good luck in your final semester. Like we all know how that can be, I'm pretty sure. So sending you much light, positive vibes, caffeine, energy, clear thoughts, that type of deal. So thank you again for being here. And next, we have the Rabbi Yaakov Cohen. Thank you so much.
You said my name right. That's amazing.
I
you
tried.
got it.
Try.
Yeah. First of all, it's an honor to be here. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. So I don't know what to say or where to begin. Just really in short, I was not raised as religious in a religious Jewish home. I was raised very secular, and of course in Los Angeles, California. And then I had traveled and found myself in Jerusalem, where I became a rabbi. I found myself in a college, a school for rabbis, and studied Jewish mysticism for many years, meditation and deep thought. But the real story, let's say, begins, which is most pertinent probably for this evening, which is when I was in Texas and I had a son who was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And he went through all of the the usual protocols of chemotherapy and radiation. And then he had a relapse. And we were doing all kinds of research, looking for medicines all over. And of course, we came across the possibilities of cannabis. We knew that cannabis had, many medicinal properties, but we were studying some research in Israel. And studying the research in Israel, we wanted to help our son. We ended up not going to Israel. We went to California, got a prescription, and he was doing really well on cannabis. We ended up on a farm for a while. We couldn't stay there. We came back to Texas, and the people who we were on the farm with were agreed to give us things, to send us the medicine. And he was doing great. Of course, what happened is it got stopped at the post office. The feds discovered it at the post office. They closed down the farm. My son did not get his medicine, and he ended up passing away. So as a result of that, I was already operating a kosher certification business, basically going around making sure that food is kosher for the not only just the Jewish people, but people who are interested in that safe, healthy food anyways. So then a lot of people were approaching me who were sick and had different ailments from A to Z. I was getting calls from all over going, hey, you know, we understand your son. We're sorry for your son. And then, of course, people with cancer would approach me and I would say, you got to try cannabis. Not just necessarily for pain, but, you know, there's medicinal properties as well. And then my father and some friends said, you should try to make these cannabis products kosher. And so then I moved into the cannabis business to try to not only just help people have a safe, healthy, kosher product, but necessarily also really, which most of us are probably involved in, is to try to remove the stigma that I don't know where we are now in terms of the level of stigma. Y'all can chime in. I think we're chipping away at it, but I don't know if we're there yet. As we know, Texas is probably the last place that's probably going to be legalized, okay? And I hear about different states or, you know, there's an awakening. This herb somehow is a healing herb, and there's an awakening in the world. And so I'm here, and that's part of my mission, is to make it available and to try to remove the stigma so that it can be available for people and people will be willing to try it. With, as we know, it helps a lot of people, and I know everybody would agree.
Agree. Thank you so much, Rabbi. That was a lot in itself. So I owe you two apologies now. So one, I'm really, really sorry to hear about the loss of your son. That's huge and significant. And understanding that losses of that magnitude, like you're never the same. You just learn to keep going and to keep living. So thank you for continuing to do this work also, so that, you know, others don't necessarily have to suffer from the same outcome. So I'm sorry to hear about that. I also owe you another apology because we very much pride ourselves on being culturally responsive here at Elevate. And I made a big mistake when scheduling our panelist meeting. So unbeknownst, you didn't get to meet our other panelists because we scheduled the meeting on a Friday, which is your Sabbath. So I apologize for that. That was completely on me, but I need you to know that now I know, and going forward, I won't make that mistake again.
Thank you. No problem. No worries.
And I'm sorry you're in Texas. You know, this is not the first thing. They were the last to free people and things on. So we hope Texas gets it together. They have to do better.
Everybody's going to get there. We're all going to get there eventually.
Yeah. So free the weed, Texas. Do better. Free the weed, friends. It's very tragic. But thank you so much for being here and for also being willing to share with us this evening. I'm really excited to see what you bring as well. So we have one more wonderful individual to introduce to you all. I gotta find her face. I can't. There she is. This is JR, aka Jessica Hamilton, on the mic. No, seriously. This evening, we are really, really blessed to have this wonderful individual with us, and she's gonna help me navigate our themes for the evening. So we're going to together go on a trip and a journey and explore the history of cannabis and religious texts and scriptures. We're also going to explore theological and personal ethics. And then, you know, this being an Elevate event, we got to hit all the hot button topics. So, you know, we have to talk politics too, right? So you can't get away from church and state. So we're going to bring those two together and discuss some policies and what that looks like in the context of religion. But without ado, I would love to introduce everyone to Jessica Hamilton. Jessica, can you please come on and share something about yourself? Tell the wonderful people how great you are and help them understand why we had to snag you for this event.
You are too kind. Thank you to Shonda, my co-captain this evening. So glad to work with you. It's been such a journey to get here, and I'm really glad that we are doing this. And hello to our panelists. I am honored to share this space with you all this evening. I don't take lightly that you've shared so much of yourselves already. And I appreciate that You are willing to have this public demonstration of what it means to have faith beliefs and faith values and to have those interact in the world that we live in. There is, to me, nothing more than you could do, nothing higher that you can do as a person of faith than to publicly have these sorts of conversations and to live it out in a way that is constructive, in a way that is life-giving, in a way that is inclusive, in a way that is dynamic, in a way that leads us to understanding one another better. So I'm grateful. Thank you so much for what you've already brought and what you will bring. As Tashonda said, I'm Jessica Hamilton. I am a public policy professional, first and foremost. Healthcare policy is my first career love, but I'm also a public theologian, having studied at Boston University School of Theology. Yes, I'm based in Boston. I grew up in the church. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm originally Pentecostal turned Methodist turned follower of Jesus. And that's just how I like to leave it. I believe that Jesus was a human exemplar. I don't know that I'll ever catch his divinity, but I believe that at least we can work towards having heaven here on earth together, having conversations like this that are oriented to justice and liberation for all. I'm not worried about yonder. I'm worried about right here, right now. How I got into cannabis really quickly is through public policy. I was looking for a way to think about equity differently, to think about equity in terms of how we relate to one another, because the equity conversations in healthcare in 2017 were lacking. So I turned to cannabis while I was in grad school, went to my professor and said, hey, I want to write about cannabis and faith for my final paper of my first semester. And that's what I did. Ended up turning into a public policy fellowship with the state commission here in Massachusetts. And really the big thing that I'm thinking about when I enter cannabis, because I don't engage, I'm a bit of an imposter this evening, not a member of the community, but I care, right? I don't have kids in public school, but I care about the state of education in America. We should all be participating in these conversations, whether they directly impact us or not, if we say we're folks of faith. So I, went through the fellowship, did some great research that I hope is community-based. I hope the community feels that way. The big question for me is what happens after the harm has been done, right? I studied cannabis from the point of the war on drugs forward. And so what happens after the harm has been done? And if you're a person of faith, I believe you have a role in reconciliation. And that's really sort of the crux of my work, thinking about this as in terms of our ethical commitments. And so that is why I'm excited about a conversation where you put your faith out there and what you believe, so that we can have this, again, demonstration of our commitments. And so I'm grateful and excited for what we'll all share in this space and what I'll learn from each of you tonight.
Woo! It's hot already. Awesome. So I hope that everyone is equally as excited and also sees the important value that this young lady is going to add to this conversation this evening. Again, I hope you're as stoked as to where we're gonna go. So I'll start us off with a joke, right? A naturalist, a minister, a rabbi, a chaplain, and a theologian all attend an Elevate event. And they're gonna talk about weed. I told my mom, like, who we had on the panel, she was like, that sounds like one of those, they all walk into the bar jokes. And I was like, yeah, no, except for, like, it's no alcohol, Mom. We're talking about cannabis. So I wanted to share that with everybody. I figured it'd be a good way to start us off. Nicole, I want you to know that I'm coming straight to you, my dear, with this first question. As we were going over, we definitely wanted to punt this to you.
Yeah.
So just to get us started, if you don't mind, would you mind sharing some of your spiritual and or faith beliefs about like hemp and CBD use? I
have always been a supporter, even when there was a war on drugs. I've always been someone who knew that cannabis was a natural remedy. I grew up with a lot of old school roots, I should say. So boiling it for tea, that wasn't anything new in my home or around people that I knew. Not saying it was for the children, but it's just something I knew, like that it is a natural healer, when not tampered with, of course, because there's different kinds of cannabis, so we have to be careful which ones we interact with. But a natural strain of cannabis can be used for so many things. And as a naturalist, I use CBD when I massage people. I have a good friend who her girlfriend makes CBD oil. And I also have another friend who does the same. She does CBD products. So I use it in my massage, especially when people have bad knees, arthritis, um, back issues. There's something that we always keep on hand. We sell it at the place. By the way, I didn't mention that I do have a place called the Goddess Holistic Healing Temple. And although it says goddess, it's for men and women, but goddesses run it. So, but everything we do in there is everything natural and comes from a root. So CBD, cannabis is definitely something that we utilize. And most of our clients are natural people as well. So they are already in that kind of lifestyle. So a lot of times there's just different ways to infuse it or how you want to use the CBD on yourself, And again, people have different reactions to it as well. So just getting to know a person on a natural and spiritual level, for me, I always like to know what somebody's mind and spirit is going on, because it's very important to know those things. Some people cannot do cannabis. Some people cannot do CBD. So you have to know your person and what they're capable, what they're able to handle. But for me, I think of it as it is a natural healer. Like I said, I have arthritis in my knees. I was a sports person all my life. I've done sports since I was 6 years old. So now I'm in my 40s and it starts to kick in because I'm still very active. And so I do use the CBD oil on my hips. I use it on my knees and on my upper and lower back. And it does do wonders for me. I have no complaints. As far as for the people that I work with, it has helped them tremendously. I deal with a lot of people who have depression, who have been through a lot in life. Jeremy, I appreciate your story so very much. I deal with a lot of people who have those same stories, and it's very difficult to navigate through life when you have trauma. So if you, being able to use that to help you be more focused is great. And I do see I see the upside of using it. It has helped people to control their anxiety, like I said, their depression, their health wise, and all of that. So I am 100% for cannabis. And like I said, even like the damage that's done, Jessica mentioned, I would really like to work with people who were incarcerated during that time because of it, and help them, because I know that they've been affected by being incarcerated. So that's how I feel about the cannabis journey. And as a spiritualist, we are all connected. I will say that there's not one person that can't reach enlightenment. You just have to really believe that there's no difference between the two of us. And my mom told me one time, we cry the same tears, we bleed the same, we do everything. We just have to know that and be faithful in it. And faith is a huge word, and be faithful in that, and knowing that, there is healing out there. You just need to make sure you're doing it the right way.
Wow, thank you so much, Nicole. And that absolutely makes sense from what you're sharing from your particular, from the perspective of the naturalist. It's important to understand the actual medicinal benefits, as well as the healing properties of the plant. And it obviously makes sense that this there's an intersectionality between your beliefs, right, and the plant, given that you focus on the whole person and healing. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you have to, you can't, I'm just going to tell people you can't, I know we're having a cannabis conversation, but it really is good to know yourself before you delve into those things, so that you're on the same wavelength that you're supposed to be on. Energy is everything, you know?
It is. It is. Thank you
I
so
hope I said enough, but
No,
you know.
it's great. Like, thank you. It makes perfect sense. Thank you. So my next question is for Jeremy. I'm sorry. Jeremy, would you mind sharing like any religious or sacred text that you're aware of? And what does your particular religious, or I don't want to say religion because I understand where you are as well, but your particular faith or tradition say about cannabis consumption?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you again, Nikki. It's a pleasure coming after you. That could have meant a lot of things.
I understand.
So, like I said, I don't come from a traditional background myself. I did my undergrad in religious studies. I've read a lot. I've talked with a lot of people. I've gone to lots of services, and for me, what I've kind of narrowed my tradition, I guess, down to is queer survival. I'm queer and I'm a survivor. And over the past probably 7 or 8 years before I got into hospice work, I spent a lot of time working with LGBTQIA plus survivors of partner abuse and sexual violence. So I really ground a lot of my thinking and beliefs in the survivor or as an expert of their own lives and the expert at how they survive. And that can go with anyone. I mean, we're all experts at our own lives. Because of that, or I think it maybe a mutual influence, the things that I read that inspire me and that I consider spiritual and my faith texts are third wave feminist womanist writers. So Audre Lorde, Gloria Anzaldúa, Bell Hooks, Sri Moraga, Angela Davis. I mean, really incredible queer women of color, oftentimes whose thinking and action is oriented towards loving of the self and community. And so for me, I look to these texts and I see, Gloria Anzaldúa writes about in her text Borderlands, La Frontera de Mestiza, about these, the use of substances or varying rituals to literally survive, that they become touchstones on our journey through life, and that they become these rituals that sustain us. And sometimes those rituals can look like pain, like they can be painful, like my experience with alcohol. That became a ritual that served me in some ways and hindered me in a lot more ways. When I read these texts, I can think about cannabis as something that is, if you compare cannabis and the effects of cannabis and the side effects, it's on a completely different level from alcohol, from most pharmaceuticals, and it's even just the work, the labor of the cannabis industry and cannabis it is a communal effort of growing and working together to care for one another, or it ought to be. It hasn't always been that way, unfortunately, in this country for sure. But those are the kinds of texts and beliefs that really sustain me around cannabis, I think, is the really the love of community. And when you love community, it means you stand up for community and you work to right wrongs and genuinely care about one another's well-being, whether that's physical or spiritual or mental or emotional or financial, which ties into all of those things. I mean, mutual aid is really important, and cannabis plays a big role in mutual aid, I think.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. I'd never even considered the non-prescribed religious text, to be honest with you. So for you to share your particular tools, right, and what feeds your spirit and what you receive from it is so empowering to hear, because again, I don't know how many individuals feel empowered enough to step outside of the confines of the traditional religion, right? But to hear that you can not only exist in that, but that you also can access other tools as well to further, one, your connection with your higher power, but also your community is tremendous. Like that's a perspective that I don't think many of us, consider, because we have sort of this prescribed list of, well, this is what this looks like as a believer in this faith. This is what you do. You stick to these tests, you follow these commandments, these tenets, and so on and so forth. So just to hear your experience is it's encouraging and empowering, and it's differing, but it's great. So thank you. Thank you. I'd be curious. I don't want to I'd love to hear the rabbi's perspective, or even Minister Arcane's, your perspective as well. Is there any religious text that you're aware of in your particular faith that you could share with us that maybe speaks to cannabis and or consumption?
Who you want to go first?
Either. You have the mic now, and unfortunately, Rabbi's still muted, so you went.
All right. Okay. Yeah, so obviously, as I said, I'm a Christian, and part of my Christian tradition, it's deeply spiritual, and also there is a long history of it being rooted in our scriptures, right? Scriptures is sort of the foundation of who we are, and we do believe that we're followers of Jesus Christ, who was a Palestinian Jew, and we take on the holy teachings of the old of our Jewish sisters and brothers. And part of that text shows us how God created the earth. And when he created the earth, he said it was good. And when he created Adam and Eve and he created human beings, he gave them dominion to cultivate this ground. And when they cultivated the ground, he gave them the ability to produce stuff from the ground, which we talk about in the scriptures, of wine being one of those things that is produced. But also there were other stuff that was produced from the ground. And when you look at Genesis 1 verse 29, it speaks very specifically, and it says, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is of the face of the earth, and every tree with seed its fruit, you shall have them for food." And this is just one of the texts that kind of contextualizes this experience, that says that it's important to understand that what God has deemed good, we don't just call it bad because other people call it bad. And we have to reclaim what it means to be followers of our holy scriptures and teachings, and sort of push back against when people call something immoral. And so for me, just like Nicole was sort of articulating, I think in the Christian tradition, it's deeply communal, where we have a responsibility to watch over each other and guide each other. But there's a part of that journey that says there's a point that we cannot cross, because we don't make the end judgment on what happens to people. There's a scripture in Philippines that says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And with that being said, I think, and I'm contextualizing this within the understanding that a lot of folks within my community have these negative views of marijuana. And again, my question is, who taught you that it was wrong? Right? And that's always the question that we must start. And as an unapologetic Black man, I can't say because you criminalize something, that means that I have to criminalize something, because at one point, my own body was a crime, right? Who I am was a crime. And so I can't continue perpetuating and supporting systems that easily criminalize things in the name of morality, in the name of godliness, when in fact it's rooted in the level of exploitation of God's people. And I say that to say that it is important that we do not judge those who use marijuana. It's important that we understand that there's power in the marijuana plant, from teas and to herbs. Herbs is something that has been a part of the Black tradition for so long. And it's important that we reclaim what it means to, yes, support our medical industry, because a lot of us believe in there, but there's a power of natural medicine as well. And I remember one of my family members sat me down and was saying, in the 50s, when they were all going through difficult times, their grandmother used to boil a plant, and they all drink it, and they were all gone for a long time. And she reflected on it. She said, I think we were drinking out of the marijuana leaves. And now you see today, even the notion of even drinking that tea, right? And these were unapologetic Christians. The notion of drinking that tea is perceived negative. But again, the question is, who taught you it was negative? And how do we demonize something that God made good? And that's my position.
Just to add to that a little bit, that you touched upon in Genesis, the real beginning of what you'd ask the question globally is, as we notice in the world, that herbs do have the monopoly of healing powers. And that actually comes from Genesis, the third day of creation, when God created trees and the grasses. And when he created the trees and the grasses, he says, okay, every tree has to produce a fruit of its own kind. And that means that the trees, basically, God said the trees are not allowed to mix. They're not allowed to graft, right? The avocado does not do tango with the mango. He's not going to mix. The fruit trees are not mixing. Now, the grasses, the herbs, were left like, well, he didn't tell us what to do. Well, what do we do? So they had this conscious meeting amongst themselves, and they say, well, if the trees, if the trees were told not to mix, and they usually don't mix anyways. So us grasses, we cover the earth, and our nature is to mix. So we all the more so should not mix. So they came up with this logical deduction all by themselves. And now God came to them and says, because you came up with that by yourselves, he says, therefore, I give you the gift of healing. And that is why in the world that herbs in general always have the gift of healing, the special ability to heal. Now, the cannabis plant is an herb. It has a power to heal. And I think we've discussed, not for everybody, okay? We would like it to be for everybody. I know a lot of people who could use it. I'm still working on trying to get it to them, okay? You know, they could chill out a lot, okay? But listen, it is an herb, it heals. So in other words, one of the sources, if you're asking, that's probably the earliest source in Genesis for the healing power of herbs. And now there's another source, actually, that was used when they when the Israelites were in the desert and they had a commandment to build a tabernacle. And in this tabernacle, they had to make this oil. And the oil had to have fragrances, spices in this oil. You probably are all familiar with it. One of the spices that is said that has to be called, and I'm going to say it in Hebrew and I'll translate for you, is called cannabis. Cannabis, which means fragrant reeds, fragrant sticks. Okay? So here, one of the early Kabbalists, at the last generation, he says, here is an indication for cannabis, because if you put the two words together, kane, bosom, cannabis, it's the same. So here is one of the indications that they would actually use it way back in the desert when the Israelites left Egypt, that they would use it for the not only anointing oil, something for the skin, but also for, they would pour it on the vessels and everything. So everybody was involved in it. It was something that was regularly used. Now, recently, they have found in Israel, they found these altars that the people used to have, backyard altars, where they would offer sacrifices and incense. And they didn't have the instrumentation because it's thousands of years later that they're digging up. What was the substance that they were burning? They just came out with recently, and I guess you get what it is. Cannabis. It was burning. Okay. So, we have to say, until recently, with Anslinger and all of the other people, who criminalized it, demonized it, before it was a natural thing. It was something that everybody was partaking in. And if you look at the Torah rules in general, really, are the rules of the Torah, of the Bible and the Jewish people who practice. Bottom line, there really is no forbidden injunction for it. Okay? Okay, as the Torah is. The only thing that forbids it is if the law of the land forbids it. If we're in a land where it happens to be it's forbidden, so then we have to abide by those laws. Not necessarily we agree with them, but when, of course, if you're in a land where it's not illegal, so then, of course, it becomes a fantastic medicinal property, and that is open for discussion.
I had no idea that cannabis had been highlighted so much in these religious texts. Now, I have to be honest. I suspected that whenever I heard the story about Moses and the burning bush, I assumed it was Kush, but I didn't want to put that off on anybody else. I was just like, Moses is in the mountain.
God was talking to me.
On fire, and he hears voices. I've had Kush before. I've been in that same situation. I'm not saying I'm Moses, but I too know. But it is nice to know. And again, like we talk about this plant, like this plant has been around forever since the beginning, right? So to understand that it's been in use, and then you all touched on it so eloquently. And I was going to bring it up in our conversation, but you did. So you took me from basically the endocannabinoid system all the way down to we started talking about basically the prohibition of the plant and understanding that this was actually a war on people. It wasn't about the efficacy. It wasn't about any of that. It was actually just about, I'm sorry. So this is what happens when we're coexisting in spaces now in this pandemic world. It's crazy. Forgive me. But to understand, like, no, there were these other forces at play. And this is sort of how we ended up here as a society. But that doesn't mean that sort of the way that we may have been approaching it in religious community, that meant it was right. So just because someone said something about it doesn't mean it's right. So I appreciate everyone sharing that. And that's one of the universal truths that I heard you all share. So thank you so much for that.
Pleasure.
So I think this is a natural segue. Thank you, Tashonda. A natural segue into thinking about this piece of like what, now that we sort of have identified what our sacred text, what our sacred texts say about cannabis, what guides us. This is a natural segue into thinking about ethics beyond the personal, right? And so before we get there, I want to just lay out, I think, what I hope will happen, right, in this conversation. So you all just laid out, I think, your ethics, right? Like your personal understanding, right? How you've constructed your faith, who you are and what you believe, right? And so Jeremy, you forced us to open up and think about what is sacred, right? Right. And thinking about a sacred canopy, if I can say that is broader than what one person, one religion, one doctrine will give us, right? That we're experts in our own experience, and what is sacral, the sacrality of something, is something we have a role in defining for ourselves, which I think is lovely. And then Nikki talked about the oneness, your ethic as the oneness with one another and with the earth, right? That was the ethic that we got from you, just beautiful. And then Archange took us to the Hebrew Bible, and he talked about, really it gave us sort of a decolonized view of our ethics, of Christian ethics, that combines the spirituality of our African diaspora ancestors with this Christian belief, this Christian faith, right? And you asked a very clear liberationist question of who told you it was this way, right? The womanist construction of that is, who made these rules, right? Who made these rules? And then Rabbi, your beautiful storytelling helped us identify like actual text and stories, right? The documentation of this oral history that is so important to many people of faith from the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, right? Like that this was how we think of how this came to be, right? Of how herbs became healing, the assignment of that from God, right? So those are some of the ethics that you all pointed out to us in the text. But I really want to think about, what do our ethics and the text that we read, that we subscribe to, what do they mean in public? So then what words can you offer to this question? And I'm going to kick it to you first, Archange. What does one's understanding of their religion or their spirituality or their faith mean for the context in which we currently find ourselves, how we view cannabis, how we understand cannabis, right? Thinking about the war on drugs, thinking about the demoralization that you mentioned, and thinking about societal judgment, the stigma that we were talking about earlier.
All right, you're picking on me. I see that. If I understand you clearly, what I will say is, and again, I'm going to try my hardest to kind of root it in some texts. These old school Pentecostal people, if you ain't talking text, they ain't listening. But and I grew up Pentecostal, FYI. So I would just say, there's in Luke chapter 4, we hear Jesus talking about one of the reasons why he's here on this earth. And it's taken, and you can also see an aspect of this text in the Hebrew Bible, where Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recover the sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And for me, that means that we must be in the liberating business as Christians. That means that we must be in the business that says, how do we stand together, lock arms as God's people, as God's children, and make sure that we do right and not harm to God's people. That means that also, as members of the body of Christ, what does it look like for us to not only just speak the truth and to stand up and have a desire to want to support those who are held captive, but also what does that actually mean for us to actually start putting our bodies in the line? And what I mean by all this is saying that marijuana has not only been, it doesn't just have negative connotations and negative narratives to it. It is part of a very strategic and systematic system that was intended to criminalize and to oppress God's people. And we see that both in the criminal justice system with the disparities of Black and brown people in who are locked up for nonviolent offenses. And we also see it both in our society of the alienation, right? This you are not part of our community. And for me, that is the antithesis of what I believe the teachings of Jesus Christ call us to do on this earth. And I guess the point is just saying that we can't keep doing what the state wants us to do. We have to make sure that we're doing what God calls us to do. And that means that sometimes we have to buck up against the laws that continue to perpetuate this isolation and this oppression of our people. And I say that because right now, as much as we've seen progress throughout the nation in states passing marijuana laws, we still have people who've literally lost everything for smoking or for carrying around marijuana at one point in this country was free and there was no crime. And so for me, I can't participate in that unfair, unjust system. And for me, we have to be in the liberating business. That means free God's people and allow them to have the liberty to pick and choose what they want to do. That's my choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a recognition that that the laws post-date the existence of what we're talking about as being a healing substance, right? They post-date it. They came later, and really are the antithesis of the natural law of God. If you believe, if you're, a follower of Jesus, if you're a Christian, we could get into a different conversation about natural law, but these post-date God's creation. And so, there is a little bit of an ethical dilemma there. And Arcane just saying that we follow God in that dilemma. Who else would like to chime in here? Anyone else about the dilemma, right? The ethical dilemma on the line here between the public view of cannabis currently, previously, we hope it's changing, and one's faith.
I'm just telling you, like, I'm a person who's like almost like called the rogue rabbi. Understand? There's a lot of rabbis who are against me in terms of what I do. I had to step outside the box and to do what I do. I'm taking, it's very, it's a big risk because, I give kosher certification to a lot of edibles all over. And there's a lot of other organizations that will also give kosher certification. So I'm in between, kind of like, I'm like trying to break the stigma. And then there's these other rabbis who are not there yet. And their hand is not necessarily on the pulse of the community. It's very sad. And a lot of leaders, their hands are not on the pulse of the community in terms of what's needed now. So I'm always caught in that kind of thing. I have to try to explain myself, even though that they're going to look down on me. But I'm still going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm getting stronger every day.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard, this talk of being on the line, right? And where do you go from here? And how do you bring others in and not further isolate them? Nikki, Jeremy, would love to get you in on this conversation. Any thoughts?
Hi. So first I want to say to the rabbi and to Archange, if I said your name right, because I know about the con and the herbs in the Bible, you know, and I do want to state that in Northern Africa, there was a place called Kush. So, I mean, that is where it was abundantly grown. It says it right there. I mean, a lot of people of color know that, but I don't know if everyone knows that. Before they changed the names of Africa, there was a Kush. Okay, so we do know everything about natural medicine if you were to go back in your textbooks. I mean, not your textbooks, forget the ones you learned in school, but if you were to really go back 8,000 BC or before that, I mean, or even pay attention to someone like Dr. Sebi, who went against the Supreme Court twice and won because he proved that natural herbs and medicine cured cancer, AIDS, dementia, diabetes, all of those things. So knowledge is power. That's the first thing I'm going to say. The more knowledge you have, we can fight these things that we were talking about, oppression and things. If you have the knowledge, you can get past these things and just spread it. As far as ethically, I think people just need to learn to be themselves. I grew up in a Baptist, Methodist upbringing. I never felt like myself during that whole time. I felt like someone was always telling me what to do, how I was supposed to dress, how I was supposed to think. I was supposed to be a nurse, a secretary, or a stewardess. You know, there were so many things that people were telling me to be, what not to take. Don't take drugs, don't do marijuana or cannabis or any of those things. But until I stepped out on my own and decided to I took like a year, I'm not gonna lie, I took a year of just not listening to anyone else. And I found so much healing within myself to just be me. I had no idea who I was until then. I was like 20 something years old, you know? So if people are able to really take your knowledge from your religion or whatever you have, your roots are everything. So whatever your roots are, you can take that information. But really, I would really like to advise people to be yourself for once, you know, honestly. Have your experiences, and if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But ethically and moralistically, I think it really is not good for us to feel like because of our religion and our parents and things that we have to stop what's inside of here on our own. You understand what I'm saying? Cannabis is bad because, like Archange said, and the rabbi, people tell you it's bad, but it's cured so many people. People tell you candy's bad, you know, things. It is because I am a naturalist. It's really bad, but you know, you have to experience that for yourself, you know, and then you can say, hey, it's not good for me, but you're someone else. I'm someone. Everybody is their own individual. And I respect what everyone had to say here because it is very important for you to do your research and get knowledge and then decide what works for you.
Absolutely, yes. And it goes along with what you were just saying, goes along with what Jeremy mentioned about the lived experience, providing you expertise in your own body, right? Your own experience. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll chime in. One thing I think about that I'm thinking about a lot, especially recently, you know, like, so New Mexico had legalized medical use of cannabis. And then last year, the governor legalized it for regular use, for just adult consumption. And that begins this year. It'll take effect, I think, in June, which is exciting and also raises a lot of questions for me, because when I look back to, you know, the things that have inspired me and the orientation that I take to the world, and looking at the importance of supporting one another and working in community, it does not escape my recollection or my acknowledgement that we have people whose lives are still, they're still trying to put them back together after being criminalized for using cannabis. And now we have, there's in New Mexico, there's people, especially cis heterosexual white men, who are now profiting a lot off of the legalization of cannabis. And that's really hard for me because it goes, it just jumps over the importance of community and takes cannabis, pardon me. Ooh, smoked a little too much. Just kidding. It does really take the power that cannabis has in bringing people together, and puts it towards a capitalist end and a colonizing end. And so I think about, Gloria Anzaldúa has this, brings up this concept of Nepantla, which is this kind of in-between state. And that in-between state, there's so much potential and power. And it almost feels like in the state that we're in now, relating to cannabis, at least legally, that we are in this strange potential where it could go lots of directions. And I think that if we really center community and have these kinds of conversations with people and orient cannabis away from a tool to make money and look at it for its healing purposes, I think that we could start to really make some differences in the world. But it is an ethical dilemma, because are we going to get there? Capitalism is still alive and flourishing in this country for sure. And so whether or not that embrace of community will truly occur is, I think, still up for debate, but we're making steps towards it.
It's interesting you spoke about the ethical dilemma, Jeremy. One of the ethical dilemmas that we have often in this industry, right? We're on the nonprofit side, but the fact that we are in a position to advocate, to promote and really to, I want to say, like, we're doing our best and doing our part to make sure that we're trying to help cultivate a community that is equitable, like in an industry that is equitable. That's what we really focus on. That's what Elevate is here to do. But understanding that there are still many individuals who are in jail, they're incarcerated for this, right? So you talk about, like, it's really hard. Like, we've talked to license holders of color, and it's difficult for them. They're like, here I am in this place in this state where I get this opportunity, but look at how many of my brothers and sisters are still incarcerated for one, and or either are still being cherry picked, if you will, and continuing to be arrested at disproportionate rates. So it's just like looking at that, and then we talk about the religious, aspect of it. Like, how does that sit well with our religious and faith-based community, right? Especially if we're talking about do the least harm. Like, I would think that that's how we should really be putting, things in perspective. It just, so when you said that just resonated with me. And one of the other things that I identified with both you and the rabbi on was just us talking about the medical efficacy of the plant, right? So I've shared this with you all. I'll share with the community again and again. I'm a patient, and I was initially prescribed psychotropics and was on them regularly and doing all the things I was supposed to do. But whenever I went to my primary care physician and I talked about the side effects that I was having, what would happen is I noticed that they just kept increasing my dosage, right? Versus saying, hey, this isn't working for her, like this is happening. So the only thing that happened was the symptoms just got worse, right? But I started to educate myself and came across this thing called the endocannabinoid system, and it blew my mind. So once I learned that we're all genetically pretty much wired to accept the cannabinoids from the cannabis plant, and that when we talk about homeostasis and achieving that, and that this plant is a big part of that, and that as humans, like, we're just prone for that, like, hey, your body says that's the good stuff, give it to me. And I went on this, I was in North Carolina initially, and my therapist at the time said, hey, if you lived in a state where cannabis was legal, you would be an ideal patient. So I left North Carolina and moved to Massachusetts based on a life event, and I immediately became a patient. So I had to learn what worked for me, what didn't work for me. I had to learn, like, what terpenes I needed to stay away from. I needed to figure out, like, listen, this is microdosing. You can't do too much indica and find yourself, or myrcene and find yourself slumped over at work. Like, it's not gonna work, right? But there was no medical physician who could walk me through that. Now, if I wanted to get back on the psychotropics, they could do that all day, every day, and then send me to all the specialists to keep treating the symptoms, right? So from the religious perspective, right, like, what do we do? And I'll ask Jeremy first, like, what do we do when religion and the medical authorities, like, what happens when those two authorities bump heads, when they're not aligned?
Yeah, great share and questions. I mean, my first thinking, Arcane, I think, spoke to this, is that sometimes you have to resist the forces that control us. And healthcare is biopower. It is something that determines who lives and who dies. And it's a norm that has been established by, certain individuals and groups who benefit the most from it. And so I think that you've got to be brave, and as you're able to, because not everyone's in a different place, and so not everyone can speak out all the time, for safety reasons, for to survive. But I think that Audre Lorde says, my silence did not protect me, your silence will not protect you. We're all going to die. And even if we live our entire lives and we choose not to speak or to act up about important matters, we're still going to die. We're just going to do so silently and immobile. And so we need to be, when we find the courage, when we find, I probably couldn't have done this even 3 years ago, be on this kind of panel. And I've reached a point now where I feel that I am in a comfortable enough place where I can speak out about things and can say, we can, if you look at hospice care. I spoke with a doctor recently this week, kind of in preparation for this. And one of the things she brought up was, I, as an end of life practitioner, will prescribe cannabis a lot of times in the ways that you're mentioning, because the medicines that are prescribed to people to manage their symptoms bring so much side effects. So you've got, if you're already like putting it in a hospice perspective, if you're already suffering and life is changing rapidly, perhaps, you don't need nausea, and you don't need constipation, and you don't need to be awake all night, and you don't need to be malnourished because you're not hungry. Cannabis solves a lot of those problems without the nasty side effects that come with the prescriptions that are pushed on people. And so I think it'll take being brave and building relationships with people who do have varying types of power. Because as a faith people, we all have a certain power. Everybody has, some power, but we have a different realm of power, so to speak. And having conversations with medical providers, with social workers, with these different individuals who might be able to become allies and help to change some of the systems that are in play is really key, I think. It's all about community.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you.
Is it okay to chime in?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if you was calling on folks or not. One of the points I want to hit on is, when it comes down to the tension or the conflict between, the religions and the medical authorities, I just think it's important that questions continue to be raised up. And you're not wrong for raising questions. That's actually a good trait that we have to have, especially those of us in the Black community understand there's a long history of mistrust, and rightfully so, in the medical community. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because the more questions you ask and the more data you seek, you will see that our government has not allowed institutions to really do study on marijuana. And so we have this whole industry of saying something is bad, but the average person in the average institution, even our government itself, hasn't really put the whole strength of the institution into studying it, right? And even to this day, I mean, we still don't even. There's a bill that refuses to even legalize it. And my point is just saying there's so much as a nation, as a government, that we don't know. But we have our own experiences, right? We have a long history of actually knowing what this plant does. This whole illegal, this whole bad for you is still relatively new. For a very long time, everybody was smoking cannabis up in here. And they just criminalized it for various different reasons, but at the center of it was race. And so for me, it's just important that our people and folks who consider themselves faithful and religious, especially in the Christian community, you have to raise the questions before you call something bad. And another point I want to hit on is that it's like drinking. I'm not promoting that everybody should drink, right? Or everybody should not drink. I think you should try to figure out what you want to do and figure out how it functions with your system and how it allows you to function, or how it helps or hurts, right? And we can find biblical justifications for drinking wine and strong drink, and another side that says you shouldn't, or you should do less of it. And it's the same thing with marijuana. Before we demonize it, we also have to understand how it functions with us and what we're trying to do. But the point I wanted to make is, I think one of the biggest issues in my community, in the Black community, that hinders us is respectability. And you have people who are trying to prove that we are above the fray and that we are not criminal and we are American citizens and we can assimilate with the dominant culture and don't depict us this way. And anyone who's quote unquote smoking, drinking, consuming hemp, cannabis, anything, any edibles, anything whatsoever, it's an embarrassment for our community. And I feel the reality is those people are problematic for our community, because within that respectability, they end up supporting laws that end up killing our community. And for me, I think we have to do a better job at pushing up against respectability, because respectability is killing our congregations. And that's why our congregations are still struggling to this day to even get younger people in it. Our congregations are dying, and they don't want to admit that they're dying. And why? Because we reject you if you got tattoos. We reject you if you drink. We reject you if you smoke weed. We reject you if you're doing anything, if you don't dress right. I mean, gosh darn it, what the hell? You're going to have an empty ass church? So we got to get over our damn selves and get back to the business of God's people and meeting people where they're at instead of throwing them out because you have this stigma with marijuana because the state pushed it in your brain to make you hate other people because of them consuming it. And that's what we need to start doing.
Right. That part right there, where we're
Phenomenal.
challenging respectability politics that further demonize our communities, further exclude and isolate our communities. This is the conversation that some folks don't want to have because it butts up against the tradition, right? The tradition, right? But sometimes our elders need to be told. And so that is what I guess we're going to do here tonight. Thank you, Minister Archange, for that perspective. It's true. It's hard, right? There are churches that are dying, right? People don't want to be judged for something that we've already categorized in this conversation as a creation of God, right? And the respectability politics, I would argue, are not generative, right? Right? And anything that's not generative is sinful, in my opinion, right? It's sinful to reject people. It's not life-giving. So with that in mind, how do we turn to having conversations with folks, with people of faith? How do we get them on board? How do you all have conversations with, Jeremy, I'm thinking about folks that you counsel in hospice. Rabbi, I'm thinking about folks that you work with or potential parishioners, if you will. Archange, same with you, and Nikki, with those who you're healing. How do we have conversations that really start to push back on the tradition and push back on respectability? What advice do you have? Anyone can start.
Yeah, I would just, you have to have an open mind, and they have to have an open mind, because people with a closed mind are not going to listen to you if they've already decided. I think everybody could agree with that. But sometimes you plant seeds, and sometimes you say, hey, a lot of people benefit from this, and maybe this is worth a try. And just to be open. The biggest thing, I think, the universal rule is to always be accepting of people, no matter what they are, and everybody's in their process. And I just think person to person, conversation by conversation, but being non-judgmental and accepting is probably the start, at least the beginning way to go. Listen, I have to cut out because I have another appointment that I have to go to. So I'm going to have to leave you all, and I appreciate the opportunity. Okay.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I will piggyback off of what the rabbi said, and it kind of goes back to everything that I believe, that once we get out of a judgmental state with each other, it'll be so much easier. People have a lot of pressure on them to be who they think they're supposed to be. And again, with the people in the Black community, especially, as Archange had mentioned, a lot of times cannabis is looked at as a bad thing. It's looked at as if you're doing it, you're low life, and you don't care. But that's not true. If you can let people be themselves and listen. One thing I do is I'm a counselor, like 100%. I listen to people and hear what they have to say and then go by that. I think sometimes people have premeditated judgment on a person or because of a lifestyle that they're living, but it's okay. We can get further and break all these glass ceilings and stuff if we just, like the rabbi said, keep an open mind. A tree that doesn't bend will break. So that's all I'd say to people. If you're not a flexible person, if you stay in the box, you're not going to be able to elevate your consciousness, elevate your mind to see the bigger picture. And we'll always be under the sorry to say that, under the thumb of laws, capitalism, unfortunately, and things like that. But if we just take the time to, when we actually have a conversation with someone, to just keep an open mind, whether they're, I'm not any of these things. I'm literally a spiritual person, but I've never had people put me down about that, or question, why aren't you a Christian, or why aren't you a Muslim, or anything like that, because I have knowledge in front of me, and just like everyone was saying, knowledge is everything. Knowledge builds community. Knowledge builds a sense of self to make proper decisions, to make proper friends, to develop yourself in life. So if we can do those things, we'll be on the right track. Okay, and let everyone just be a human being. Let us all be who we are destined to be. We'll be all right.
I'll encourage my brothers and sisters in faith to be encouraged. So I was raised, I'll share this. I was raised Baptist, right? And one thing that my mother would always tell me is, she would ask me, she would say, well, remember who Jesus had the hardest time preaching to. And she would always say that, always say that, always say that. And as I got older, like, I understand it. Like, the hardest folks for him to preach to was his own. He had to go out. He had to perform all these wonderful wonders. He had to do all these great things for others before he came back home and his own was ready to hear his message and to accept him. So me personally, like, I share that I'm a patient. I share that I'm a consummate professional. Like, I am not the stereotypical stoner. I'm not zoned out on the couch somewhere. That's not it. Like, I work hard, I work a lot. But to be that face, and especially when it comes to our community, because it's been so demonized and it's done irreparable harm, it's crazy, but to be that face so that they can see someone different. It's like, if you see it, you can be it, right? Like, I'm not saying see me and be a stoner. That's not at all what I'm recommending. But what I am saying is, if you see someone who does the research, right? Who steps out on faith, right? Who lives outside of the prescribed boxes, right? But who does what's best for them while trying to continue to invest and grow their community and make sure that everyone's around is okay. Like, when we think of the quintessential drug user, you don't think of that, right? But this is the reality of what it is. So I think continuing to lead by example and to share truth is what's going to be really important, I think, and not just changing our faith-based community, but our community as a whole, right? Society as a whole.
I really appreciate that. I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation in general, but I appreciate that a lot, Shonda, because I think that sometimes we may not realize what we can do, the power that we have in just being authentic and holding space to be authentic. It's interesting how this kind of talking about cannabis is similar for me in my work, at least, with talking about queerness, going into spaces, just being me and holding that and knowing that, I've had patients who have told me to stop talking and to leave the room. And that's fine. We're not for each other. That's okay. I can respect that. But I've also had people who have loved it and who've asked lots of questions about my queerness. I've had a lot of staff who've asked questions about my queerness, knowing that I'm approachable in that sense. I definitely don't want to give the message that you should, by any means. I mean, Google is great. So if you have the means to Google things, do so. because you shouldn't always put the burden of knowledge on the token person in your life. But knowing that I am comfortable with that, with questions and being approached, people are more open about, asking about pronouns and gender. What is gender? Well, I mean, that's a great question. Let's break it down. And so the same thing I think is with cannabis, is with being honest about, I'm a patient. I am open about my consumption, because I can also show that, I can do this and keep living, or I can follow my brother's path and drink myself to death. Which would you rather me choose, if these are the kinds of options that I have to me? So being able to hold yourself and your authenticity where you're going, and you can't always do it in every space. You've got to be strategic and where you're revealing more and revealing less. It's all a drama of sorts, but when you have the opportunity to be yourself, especially for people, I mean, it's interesting to talk with people who are on hospice, like, 82-year-old little ladies who are super shy about their cannabis use, even if it's the ointments. They're like, oh yeah, I used my juice today. And being someone that they can feel comfortable talking about that with is helpful, because it does break the stigma even a little bit. And that's what we need to do.
I love that, Jeremy. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Archange, any words of advice for the church mothers and the big hats and the chairman of the deacon board? How are we going to talk to them?
Well, I mean, if I was to bridge the gap, I think I'm thinking about a multi-layered of folks. But number one, I think I would start by reminding people who they were in the Christian tradition. We talk about saved, who they were before they were saved, right? Having that conversation with them about humanity and who they were as individuals. I would remind others of what do they do when no one is watching, right? When they are in secret places, and no matter what they do, God still loves them, right? I will remind them of all the patience that God has had with them over the centuries, over the decades, and their generations, etc. And why not have that same level of patience with each other? I will remind them that we cannot continue to profess a love and not understand that love is actually an action. And what are they doing about these unjust laws in America? Because you can't just pray them away. We have a notion and this understanding that faith and action has to be connected. I will remind them about 1 Samuel 16, where this great prophet Samuel walked around, and when God told him that he was the one that was supposed to pick the new king of Israel, he went and he said, surely this person must be the new king. And God had to remind Samuel, you're wrong. Why did he say that? He says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or the height or his stature, because I rejected him. What he said is that man look at the outside, but I look at the heart. And I will just remind us to talk to children, because they will tell us the truth. And lastly, remind my sisters and my brothers and my siblings that we are not God, and we are not here to make judgments on people. We have no hell or no heaven or anywhere else to put people. Let's just love people the way God wants us to love.
Amen. Excellent. Excellent. All right. I think I have one more question before we send it over to Q&A. By the way, Archangel, I have a list of deacons I'm going to give to you. You can reach out to them. Um, so one last question, and a lot of you have noted that, for example, Archange said uh, we can't research cannabis right now because it's illegal. We do not spend federal funds on understanding cannabis. The government will not have the NIH or anyone else study it to find out its scientific effects, right? Because it's not. Oh, hold on, Tashonda, you go ahead.
Well, what I want us all to like remember and to understand is that when we talk about respectability, because this research does not exist, is not because the research never existed. Again, this information was on the shelves. There had been extensive research done about cannabis. But when we entered prohibition, the higher learning institutions were tapped on the shoulder and told to remove all of their information regarding cannabis off of the shelves. So this was an active misinformation campaign to demonize this particular plant, again, for other reasons outside of trying to fight the war on drugs. So that's all I wanted to say. It's not that the information never existed. It did. We just know that our government chose to pull it so that we couldn't enlighten ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for that, my friend, for that correction. And for new questions that people have today. But we don't have the federal dollars. We can't assign federal dollars to new questions. I'm thinking about, a couple of years ago, there was a question about should pregnant women, engage in cannabis for nausea? Like, we don't have the tools and the funding to support those new questions. But absolutely, I appreciate the framing of it being a disinformation campaign, because it was. Research existed. So understanding that we have a changing policy landscape, or one day we might have federal dollars to research this, understanding that slowly but surely there are many states who are approving medical use, and many that are also considering adult use. The tide is shifting. Soon somebody might be able to get a bank loan to open up a business, right? Like, wow, right? If you're coming from a community that was undercut, right, and left out, that might be a really big deal. So we're not done with cannabis, right? This is a conversation that is here to stay. So while we're transitioning, while the legal and policy landscape is transitioning, how can faith leaders like yourselves, how should they view cannabis? How should they talk about it?
Is this for Jeremy and Archange?
I consider you a faith leader too.
Okay.
So it's for all three of you. Yep.
I tell people all the time, even research. I'm sorry, if you don't have the money to do research yourself. I don't think people do it in politics all the time. They listen to what politicians say and they don't research the information and they just go with it. Research is everything. There's not a day that I don't wake up that I don't research a fruit or a vegetable or a plant or something, because I want to try new things. I want to see. My hip is hurting. I tried a few things. Now let me see if I haven't tried this certain parsley leaf. I haven't tried. Research. Knowledge is everything. And if you don't have everyone should have the ability. I know that we do, but if you don't have the time or patience to do that, you must have a confidant or someone that you can go to, a naturalist, a spiritualist, someone. But the knowledge is everything. Knowledge is everything. I couldn't voice it enough. And that goes within the church. Hopefully Archange will back me up, but knowledge, even when you read your Bible, there are a lot of things that I questioned in the Bible. I read it myself. You know what I mean? And then I would go and ask the question. But you have to get the information first in order to battle anything. Nobody with a brain nobody who doesn't have knowledge has conquered anything. Nothing. The most fearless leaders were so intelligent. And the art of war, prime example, tells you every single thing you need to know. but that was based on knowledge, you know. So that's my whole thing as a leader of faith and everything. I tell people it does, even if I tell you, research it yourself. Your knowledge is your own power. We're only responsible for ourselves. That's it. You are responsible for you. And that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, thank you for
Yeah.
jumping right in. I realize I worded the question a little differently, so you can take my question as posed, or you can answer this one. Will the transitioning legal and policy landscape change religious leaders' views of cannabis? Right? At one point, we know well that there were religious leaders advocating for slavery. It was what was best for the enslaved Africans in America, right? Policy changed. Oh, okay. So we know we've been here before. Will it shift again?
Yeah, it's always going to shift. It is time. Everything shifts. It's a ever changing times. You know, so unfortunately, things do shift. It might go up for a moment and then come back down. But again, like I say, for religious leaders, they need to know if you're going to be a leader, you need to know your people. You need to know who you're leading. You need to empathize with them. You know, I have some empathy, know who they are. You know, a lot of people want to lead, they want to be a leader, but don't know how to lead. You know what I mean? So you have to have that information to be able to share properly. And if you don't agree with it, before telling everyone else, and I do mean this so much, before you tell everyone else your opinion and stuff, make sure that there's a basis behind it. Make sure. You understand what I mean? A lot of times we say things and there's no base, you know, there's no root of it. And it really misguides people. You know, it really misguides people. If we want to say there's going to be change, then we need to make sure that we are knowledgeable and that when we share information with people, it's the right information.
Absolutely, a responsibility to get it right. Thank you. Yes. Anyone else?
I can chime in. I think that there is change happening. I can definitely see it, and I can see it in not just in how cannabis is being regulated, but how psychedelics have, in kind of general, are starting to come into being researched as tools for depression, for promoting post-traumatic growth, for supporting people in these alternative ways that really, I mean, a lot of indigenous communities have been using for centuries. I think a big thing is that we need to ensure that the people who are doing the research are people who are not represented often, whose voices aren't often lifted up. Because, you know, I mean, Cyber Valley just spent millions of dollars on psychedelic research. But what does that mean? Does that mean that that's going to be available for a certain group of people who can afford it? And how do we expand access? How do we make sure that everyone who needs cannabis can access it safely and without having to, you know, mortgage their home if they have one, or really struggle to get to the point of accessing substances, cannabis particularly. So making sure that while the change is happening, we are being vocal and striving to empower the least represented and the most vulnerable oftentimes, so that it becomes kind of like a trickle around. If we can support, I always think, you know, if you can support a survivor, you can support everyone else in the world if you support a survivor, because you meet all these basic needs and then you go from there. So making sure that the people who are having the conversations and doing the research and advocating for policy are us, not just the corporations and not just the billionaires.
Yes.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Jeremy and Nicole. I think for me, the scriptures talks about in Matthew 20, verse 26, and it says, the greatest amongst you are those who serve. And I think the spirit of what I've been hearing is that folks just need to understand we need to get back in the service business. Like, how do we serve our communities? And the best way in and around this way to serve them is to make sure we're doing our due diligence as leaders. It's just important to get back to the fundamentals. Every preacher knows before you get up in that pulpit, before you preach a sermon, you got to know what you're talking about, right? And you spending time to exegese the text and eisegese the text and learn the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and you're trying to learn the context and the history. You're doing a lot of information and background to make sure you give the right spirit to our people. But with marijuana, you just want to spiel everything you feel with zero information. Like, how do you do right by God's people by preaching a word rooted in what you've done hours of research in? But on the topic of marijuana, you don't even want to do 5-minute Google. And for me, that's called a total disrespect to the community, a total disrespect to the people, the least of these, especially those who are incarcerated because of this crazy behind laws that can keep rolling out. And so for me, if we're gonna serve, let's serve completely. Let's do our due diligence. Let's partner with community organizers and community organizations who are doing the work, who know the research. Let's incorporate all that knowledge from our research to the knowledge that we're pulling from these nonprofit organizations and community organizers. And let's have an interfaith dialogue with Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists around what they feel around this topic and what are some of the things. And then we bring it home and we teach a Bible study on it. That's how you make it very practical. And unless you're doing that, all you're doing, you're just admitting you're scared as hell. And any one of us who profess to be followers of the teachings of Jesus Christ and you scared as hell, that means that God doesn't exist in you. You allow fear to be your director, your guidance. And as Christians, we need to make sure that we are bold and holding on to a real piety that is rooted in our convictions in truth and liberation for God's people. And we should not be afraid of being excommunicated from our congregations and having our salaries pulled or whatever the case is that you're afraid of for speaking the truth. So get down to the truth. Learn, research, do your due diligence, but don't be a problem of incarcerating millions of other people because of your ignorance. And we know the Black church especially was complicit in some of these policies because we did what we thought was right. And now we look back and say, what happened to our community? Don't let it happen again. And I'm not going to be part of that.
Our change, I think you're awesome.
What's the song, Take Me to Church? I feel like I have been at service for the past 2 hours, but like in a good way. Let me tell you something. I never liked revivals ever. But this was a lot. And I mean that and honestly just being here and being able to hear so many different perspectives and different schools of thoughts, but then to hear the universal truths and to see to understand the intersectionality and to see where we all align, different sides of the mountain, but same mountaintop. My team will laugh when they hear me say that. But I feel that's resonating with me at the end of this event. Like, geez, like at the beginning of this, Jessica and I, we weren't really sure how it's going to go. And just to be candid for everyone, our audience and community, we didn't necessarily know where everyone stood on this particular topic before we had this panel. But we just knew that we had a group of leaders who were willing to share their stories, their understandings, their perspectives, their experiences, and really have this difficult conversation. You know, again, they say you're never supposed to talk finances, politics, or religion. Well, we should also add the vaccine to that too, because that's another hot button topic these days. But we managed to do it and do it successfully. So I'm proud of us. Like, if nothing else, again, this conversation, this event was not to change anyone's mind, but to open everyone's mind. So let's get to a place where we can have the conversation. Let's start exploring what this looks like in our different communities. And again, though we may have different and varying faiths, we're all here, really, we're all part of the same human race. We're all have, you know, we have to figure out how to work together to make this thing better, because right now what's happening is not working. So much, so great, so good for all of us. And when it doesn't work well for all of us, then it's not really working well for any of us, in my opinion. That's my opinion. So thank you all so much. We were going to do some Q&A, but I can honestly tell you the only thing that I've gotten in the Q&A section is kudos. So they love you all. Everyone really seems to feel inspired. They really seem to be full from this conversation. I mean, I got one comment who they were talking about how they're not necessarily a believer, but this conversation has inspired them, right? So again, us just showing up, just being who we are, and being vulnerable, right? And being brave, right? And being examples, I think is awesome. And via the feedback, we can already see the value add. So I really don't have any Q&A coming from the audience. Do we have any final thoughts? We could go around and give any final thoughts and takeaways before we close out.
I just want to say everything that I believe it did happen today. So to all of the guests, I'm glad that you all actually, despite to be honest, I think we all came to the agreement that we're all human. We all need knowledge. We all need community. And without those things, we can't succeed. So as long as we're on that page, our religious beliefs and backgrounds, those can be something, you know, not to focus on, but the three things: the community, the people, the knowledge, and really being a leader that people trust. And is very important. It's something that is deep down in my spirit and soul, that I just want to be a person that people can come to no matter what, and talk to. And I would love to have all of the people in my circle who are leaders to be just as like welcoming to the community and to the people. And again, with the knowledge of cannabis and the benefits of it, and how it's benefited all of us, and being able to spread that is wonderful. So Jeremy and Archange and Tashonda and Jessica and the rabbi, everyone, thank you. I got a lot from it. It's very fulfilling for me too. And it actually went really great. I was sometimes, when I, like you said, Tashonda, when you talk about different backgrounds religiously and politics, it gets a little, you know, you're like, am I walking on eggshells? But this was wonderful. And it's because everyone actually has a sense of knowledge and a sense of who they are. And it really goes a long way, because when you do have those two elements, you don't have to argue or bicker or anything. You can respect people's opinion and who they are without flaw or cause. And I love that about this discussion. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I could go next. Yeah, I just want to, Nicole, I just want to say thank you for just your energy that you shared today. I feel it. You didn't have to say much, but I know you are a powerful woman, and I just want to just say continue being this beacon of a hope that we all need, and I really appreciate that. Jeremy, I just want to thank you just for sharing your pain with us and allowing us to be a part of your life at this very short period of time. And just this, I admire your courage and your resiliency to not give up, because you could have did it a long time ago, but you keep fighting, and I'm really inspired by you. And I just, again, Jessica and Tashana, just thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, I didn't know what you were going to get. I didn't even know what I was going to get, but so thank you. And Rabbi Cohen, I know he had to run. I really appreciate his words and his testimony about his own son, and I thank you for that. I will just say, I said this before, you know, I'm not a smoker. Obviously, I smoked before, and I think my passion comes from seeing so many people I love just have their lives ruined. Just a little boy, just seeing people I care deeply about, and just seeing what the police have done to put them in jail for little stupid stuff. And it hurts me every single day to think about how their lives are lost because of these laws that exist, and the root behind them is just so evil. And I don't believe that God has called me to be a part of the problem. I believe that God has called me to be part of the solution, and I refuse to demonize anyone. I could talk to him, we can have dialogue, we can talk about what works, what doesn't work, but I'm not going to be a part of that system with locking up people and demonize people and making people feel dehumanized anymore. I can't do that. And I'm going to resist with every bone in my body against people in my own community and my faith tradition who tries to use the words of Jesus Christ against my brothers and my sisters. And so this is the place that I come from. And I thank you all for just accepting me in my own self. And I just want to let you know that I'm very appreciative in this moment. And I hope our words collectively really has an impact on whoever decides to hear this. So thank you again.
Thank you, Archangel. Thank you. Thank you for showing and sharing your heart with us this evening, because what I felt you brought was your heart. So thank you. Like, it takes a lot to be vulnerable, and you were that this evening, and you shared a lot of truth with us. So thank you. Honestly, thank you.
I agree. Thank you to everyone. It's been a real pleasure and honor to be a part of this, and I'm looking forward to the part 2 and 3 and all the parts, because this is a changing, ever-changing conversation, and it's important to keep talking about it and guiding it in ways that it ought to go. I am also really grateful, Archangel, Nicole, Jessica, Shonda, Rabbi Cohen. It's been a pleasure and a blessing of sorts. So thank you for inviting me and all of us together. I'm curious to hear how the end of the joke at the beginning goes. So keep me up to date and in the loop.
I was gonna say the end of the joke is we all share doobie, but not everyone partakes. So okay, in spirit, we'll elevate together. That's what we'll do. Jeremy, thank you so much. You have been amazing. I mean, and fierce from email introduction to the end. You have been a true joy. I just want to thank you for coming, and I mean, just being an open book for us. What you have shared, I bet you no one expected to get that much out of this particular panel and out of your story. So just thank you for being the they row, right? Not Shiro, not hero, non-conformative. Thank you for being the they row. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Oh, a pleasure. Thank you.
And last but not least, my esteemed co-moderator, Jessica, would you like to leave us with any parting words, my dear? Go ahead and shut it down for us so we can drop the mics again.
You know, I'm really feeling very moved and contemplating right now how grateful I am for each of you for bringing your full selves to this conversation. I'm grateful. I hope that everyone who has joined us or watches this in the future really takes from this a desire, a sincere desire to put their curiosity into action constructively. And I don't just mean your curiosity with someone or something in this world, but your curiosity, I hope, with your faith as well. And that you are bold enough to have difficult conversations. The reason I'm so grateful and so full is that I love a public demonstration of one's faith, right? And it takes a lot of faith to show up when you don't know what the result is going to be, to listen to one another and to find common ground. I think that is something I'd love to see replicated in this world at large, right? I would love that, right? En masse, right? And so thank you for doing that for us tonight, for trusting me and trusting Tashonda to guide this conversation and just showing up so fully. And I hope that folks think more deeply about their commitments, right? We can call them ethics, we can call it morality, but think about your commitments more deeply, not as just what someone told you to believe, but that you construct them from the inside out. I believe God resides right here, right? And so you are co-working with God to construct those. And how about if they looked like ways to foster relationship and foster community instead of excluding other people? And I feel like that's exactly what each and every one of you did tonight. You put a hand out and invited in to each one of your faith journeys and your life experiences. So thank you.
I knew it. Didn't they tell you guys she was just going to drop the mic again? Like look, listen, you might not see me for part 2 or part 3. Jessica may just be here by herself because she doesn't need little old me. She can do this. She can fly this plane on her own. Jessica, you have been a lifeline, an amazing partner for the past couple of months that we've been planning this. And your dedication to the community, your dedication to your studies, your dedication to policy, your dedication to equity, your dedication just to society as a whole has shown through to me this entire time. So I knew, like, you know, when like minds get together, it's amazing what we can build and what we can host, if you will. So thank you so much, so much for co-piloting this with me. I could not have done this without you. So thank you so much. I've done my best to thank you all individually, but collectively, I just I feel this need to thank you also this evening for putting your own personal capital on the line. I understand what showing up and sharing means. I understand the risk that you assume with that. And what I'll say is I hope that we have at least opened the door to open those conversations so that we aren't shunned, so that people aren't closing their ears, but are truly listening and doing their best to identify and, again, find those universal truths. And if anything else, I really hope that every one of your existence challenges everyone's belief of what a quintessential believer looks like. I say that because someone, you know, like I was raised in church, and for different reasons, you know, like religion itself, and I just started not to jive for many of the reasons that we share tonight, right? If I can't show up and be myself fully, then I don't feel right in the house of God. This doesn't seem like God's house to me. That's me, personally, me. But to meet you, Jessica, to work with you, to speak with you, Arcade, to just share space with you, Jeremy, be it virtually or not, and Nicole, oh my God, that conversation that we had initially, like, and also the rabbi, please, I don't want to forget the rabbi. to be in everyone's presence and to just see you. It's like, man, like I want to go to that church. I want to go to that synagogue. I want to go to that healing center. I want to go. Like, these are the like minds that I wish to connect with. So I hope that for those of us who exist in the space and we identify how we identify and we align how we align, I hope that these images challenge sort of the old system and the old ways. And we get to see that, no, we're not alone. We're all out here. We just got to find each other. So hopefully these conversations are the way that we begin to connect and find one another. So thank each and every one of you so much from the bottom of my heart. My crew is blowing up my phone. They're thanking you all individually. So we truly, truly appreciate it. And also to our community, we want to thank you all for tuning in this evening. We do this for you. This is not possible without you. So understand, to our organization and to all of those who end up being a subject matter expert or a thought leader, understand that community truly does come first to us all. So anyone that's ever on our stage or our panel, know that we've made that alignment and we understand, and we know that those individuals have that commitment. So you all come first. So thank you so much again for rocking with us, riding with us. It's been a long conversation, but we appreciate you. We hope that you tune in again next time. And before we let you go, we do have an additional action item for those of us who are in Massachusetts, because we know that faith without works is dead, right? Can I get amen? Amen. So this is the open comment period, and it ends tomorrow for the Cannabis Control Commission. Right now, they are accepting feedback regarding disproportionate impacted areas. So those communities who have been most harmed by the war on drugs, prohibition, what has happened is they're now taking a look and trying to decide if they want to go in and take a look at the original metrics and maybe try to figure out some different definitions to make sure that those who have been most impacted by the war on drugs are absolutely able to participate in the industry, and that they're doing their part as far as restorative justice is concerned. And those individuals are not, being left out and left behind for something that, again, definitely, marginalized us and criminalized us. So please, 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 the deadline is tomorrow, but please, please, please just put your thoughts on some paper. No one has to be a well-polished, eloquent speaker. Just understand that your words have power, no matter what they are. So please feel free. Just put something in an email, shoot it over to them. You can send it to the email commission@cccmass.com. Again, the email address is commission@cccmass.com. So feel free to send your draft letters, again, regarding the areas of disproportionate impact in the state of Massachusetts. So we're going to say good night, and blessings and grace be with everyone. Stay safe, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
guys.
You all are beautiful.
As are you. Good night, everyone.